The old farmhouse sat quietly at the edge of a sleepy Vermont town, surrounded by tall trees that whispered with the wind. It wasn't much to look at. Its paint had faded, the porch sagged slightly, and the wooden fence leaned as if tired from holding its shape for too many years. But to Evelyn Moore it was home. It had been her home for more than 4 decades, ever since she and her husband had moved there after the war. Evelyn was in her 70s now. Her life moved at a soft, unhurried pace. Most mornings began with the same routine. She made tea, fed her old orange cat, and sat by the window to watch the sun creep over the hills. She had always liked quiet places and slow mornings. The world outside had become too fast, too loud. Her little farmhouse gave her something the city never could: peace. The days passed gently. She spent time tending to her garden, reading old novels, and writing letters to her sister who lived down south. Her husband, Robert, had passed away 12 years earlier, leaving behind a silence that still lingered in every room. She missed him deeply. He had been kind and dependable, the sort of man who fixed things before they broke and never forgot to hold the door open. Sometimes she caught herself talking to him as she moved around the house, telling him when the tomatoes were finally ripe or how the weather had turned chilly again. "You'd say it's time to bring the firewood in," she would murmur, smiling faintly at the memory of his voice. But lately, the house had started making noises that didn't sound familiar. It began one night when the rain came down hard and the wind blew through the trees with a low moan. Evelyn was sitting in her armchair with her knitting when she heard it, a soft creak from the hallway. She looked up, waiting for the sound to come again. Nothing. Just the ticking clock and the rain against the windows. She told herself it was just the old house settling. After all, the floors had been there longer than she had. But over the next few days, the sound returned. Always in the same spot. A slow, drawn-out groan from the floorboards near the old hall mirror. Sometimes it came when she walked past, sometimes when she was sitting quietly in another room. Evelyn tried not to let it bother her, but there was something unusual about it. It wasn't the normal creak of wood expanding in the cold. It was deliberate, almost as if something beneath the floor was shifting. One afternoon, she decided to take a closer look. She crouched down by the spot and pressed her hand to the wooden planks. They felt solid, though slightly uneven. Her cat brushed against her knee and meowed, as if curious too. Evelyn smiled and said softly, "What do you think, old boy? Mice?" She gave the floor a gentle tap with her knuckles. Hollow. That surprised her. The boards should have been tight against the foundation, but there was definitely an empty space underneath. For a moment she thought about calling someone to check it. A handyman, maybe. But something about it made her hesitate. Robert had always handled little repairs like this. He used to joke that the house kept secrets from them, that it had been standing long before they were born and would keep whispering long after they were gone. That night, she found it hard to sleep. The rain had started again, and the faint creaking from the hallway seemed louder in the dark. She turned on her bedside lamp and looked around. The old photos on the dresser showed her life spread across the years. Her wedding day, a trip to the coast, the birth of her first grandchild. In every picture, Robert smiled with that same calm expression that had once made her feel so safe. Now, alone in the quiet house, the sound beneath the floor made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. A mix of unease and curiosity. The next morning, she decided to lift one of the boards. It wasn't an easy task. The nails had rusted and the wood resisted every pull. She fetched a small hammer and screwdriver from the shed, careful not to damage the plank too much. After a few minutes of effort, one end of the board lifted slightly with a sighing sound, as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. Dust rose into the air, shimmering in the sunlight. Underneath was darkness. She hesitated, heart beating faster. The hollow space was deeper than she expected. She grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the gap. At first she saw only dust and cobwebs. Then something caught the light, a small corner of metal. Evelyn frowned and knelt closer, easing the plank up a bit more. The flashlight beam revealed a box, wooden, old, and worn smooth with age. It was wedged tightly between the support beams. She sat back on her heels, blinking in surprise. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. The box wasn't big, about the size of a loaf of bread, and it had a simple brass latch tarnished to a dull green. It didn't look like anything she remembered owning. Carefully, she reached in and pulled it out. The air beneath the floor smelled of earth and time, as if the box had been waiting there for decades. She carried it to the kitchen table and set it down. For a while she just stared at it. The lid had tiny carvings along the edge, faint patterns that looked almost like initials but were too worn to read. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the latch. The metal resisted for a moment, then gave way with a soft click. Inside the box lay a small bundle wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed with age. The cloth felt brittle, as though it might tear if handled roughly. Evelyn unfolded it slowly. Within were several old photographs, a few folded letters tied together with twine, and a small metal pin that looked like some kind of emblem. She blinked, confused. The photographs were black and white, showing people in uniforms, men standing beside an old truck. Others gathered outside what looked like a European town square. The letters were written in a language she didn't recognize, though she could see the graceful loops of handwriting and faint traces of stamps from another time. At the bottom of the box was a ring. Simple, silver, and engraved with a name inside the band. Her hands went still when she read it. The name was Robert Moore. For a long moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. Her husband's name. The handwriting on one of the letters, those neat slanted lines, looked hauntingly familiar. She felt her chest tighten. It didn't make sense. Robert had never mentioned anything like this. He had served in the army, yes, but he'd always been quiet about his time overseas. Whenever she asked, he would say, "Some stories are better left there." Maybe this was something he had hidden during those years. But why beneath the floorboards? She sat back, the rain tapping softly on the window. The old cat jumped onto the table, sniffing the box curiously. Evelyn gently pushed him away, her mind spinning. She thought about how Robert had bought this house shortly after they married. He'd done most of the renovations himself, always saying he wanted to make the place ours. Had he hidden this then, before they even moved in? A strange chill ran through her. She turned the letters over, trying to make sense of the markings. Some of the envelopes had dates from the 1940s. The stamps bore symbols she had only seen in history books. The words weren't English, they looked German. She could make out only a few familiar words, like Liebe and Bruder, though she didn't know what they meant. Evelyn wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to put everything back and pretend she'd never found it. But another part, stronger and more restless, wanted answers. That night she barely slept. The box sat on her dresser, a silent weight in the room. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Robert's face, young and smiling, standing in the sunlight of another life. But now that image felt uncertain, blurred by the secrets hidden beneath their own floor. The next morning she made tea and sat at the table again. She took a deep breath and looked at the letters. There were 4 of them in total, all carefully folded. She didn't dare open them yet. The paper looked fragile, and she didn't trust her hands not to tremble. Instead, she examined the pin again. It was round, about the size of a coin with an insignia engraved in the center. She didn't recognize it, but something about it made her uneasy. After a long pause, she placed everything back in the box, except for one photograph. It showed a group of men standing in front of what appeared to be a European building. The man in the middle looked so much like Robert that her breath caught in her throat. Same eyes, same jawline, but younger, sharper, and wearing a uniform she didn't recognize. She put the photo down, pressed her hands together, and whispered, "Robert, what did you do?" The house was silent. For the rest of the day, she went about her chores as best she could, but her mind kept circling back to the box. Every creak of the floor seemed louder now, as if the house was reminding her that she had disturbed something meant to stay hidden. That evening, she called her neighbor, an old friend named Helen, just to talk about anything normal. Weather, grocery prices, the new family that had moved into town. But halfway through the conversation, Evelyn found herself hesitating, wanting to mention the box, yet stopping short. She didn't know why, but she felt protective of it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was love. When she hung up, she stood in the hallway staring at the lifted plank. She hadn't nailed it back down yet. The empty space beneath looked darker than before. Something about that darkness drew her in, not just fear, but curiosity. She had lived her whole life thinking she knew the man she loved, the man she had buried, the man whose name still sat carved on the headstone up the hill. But now, as the evening light faded through the windows, she realized there was a part of his life she had never truly known. She pressed her hand against the floorboards one more time, feeling the cool grain of the wood beneath her palm. "I'll find out," she whispered softly. "Whatever this is, I'll find out." Outside, the wind carried through the trees again, low and steady, almost like a voice answering back. Evelyn stood there for a long time before finally closing the plank and covering it with the rug. But she knew it wasn't over. She couldn't unsee what she had found. The box had changed something deep inside her, stirring questions that had been buried as long as the secret beneath her floor, and though she didn't know it yet, that single discovery, the quiet woman, the old floorboards, the hidden box would soon draw the world's eyes to her small farmhouse on the hill. Because sometimes, history doesn't stay in books or museums. Sometimes it waits right under your feet, until the right moment to be found. Evelyn woke up earlier than usual the next morning. The air in the house felt different, quiet but not peaceful. The box she had found the day before still sat on the kitchen table, covered with a dish towel. She had tried to go about her evening like nothing had happened, but sleep had been hard to find. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that old photograph. The man who looked like Robert. The same face, the same eyes, but in a place and time she didn't understand. The morning light streamed through the curtains, soft and golden, making the dust in the air shimmer. The house looked the same as it always had, old but warm, full of memories, but now it felt as if every shadow might hold another secret. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat across from the box. Her hands rested on the table, still and unsure. For a few minutes, she just watched the steam rise from her cup. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she said quietly, almost as if the box could answer. The cat jumped up onto a chair, curling its tail around its paws, staring at her with those calm green eyes. Evelyn gave a soft sigh. "You're no help, you know that?" After breakfast, she decided she couldn't just sit there wondering. She needed to understand what she had found. The writing in the letters wasn't in English, but maybe someone in town could help her translate them. There was a small library about 15 minutes away, and she remembered a man there who often helped her find books about history. His name was Mr. Grant, and he had once been a teacher before retiring. Evelyn wrapped the letters carefully in a scarf and placed them in her handbag. She hesitated before leaving, glancing at the photograph again. That face, Robert's face, stared back at her from another world. She turned it over and saw a faint date written on the back, 1944. Her husband would have been in his 20s then. It was the same year he had told her he was stationed overseas. But he had never said where. The library was quiet when she arrived, as it always was. The bell above the door chimed softly. The smell of old books and wood polish greeted her like an old friend. "Morning, Evelyn," Mr. Grant said from behind the counter. He was a thin man with kind eyes and silver hair. "Haven't seen you in a while." "Morning," she said, managing a small smile. "I actually came to ask you something a little unusual." He raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" She looked around, making sure no one else was close by. "I found some old letters in my house. They're not in English. I think they might be in German. I was hoping you could tell me what they say." He looked surprised but nodded slowly. "I know a little German. Bring them here and we'll see." Evelyn opened her bag and carefully took out one of the letters. The paper was thin and fragile, the ink slightly faded. Mr. Grant adjusted his glasses and began reading. His expression changed as his eyes moved across the page. At first curious, then puzzled, then uneasy. After a few moments, he set the letter down. "This is definitely German, and it's old. The writing style matches the 1940s. It looks like a personal letter, someone writing to a brother or a friend. It talks about leaving a place before it's too late, something about keeping secrets." Evelyn's heart started to beat faster. "Secrets?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, it mentions things like new papers, a different name, and starting over far away. It doesn't say what kind of secret, though." She felt the blood drain from her face. "Can you tell who wrote it?" He picked up the page again and looked closely. The name at the bottom is Robert. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Evelyn gripped the edge of the counter. "Are you sure?" He nodded again, softer this time. "Yes, that's the name signed here." Evelyn didn't know what to say. She felt dizzy, like she had stepped into a dream that didn't make sense. Robert had written in German. That couldn't be right. He had always said he grew up in Ohio and his parents were from Pennsylvania. She had never once heard him speak another language. Mr. Grant studied her face carefully. "Are you all right? Do these letters belong to your family?" Evelyn hesitated. "I'm not sure," she said quietly. "They were under the floorboards, I think. My husband might have put them there." He frowned, clearly concerned. "If you want, I could help you find someone at the university. They have a historian who specializes in old European documents. He could tell you more." Evelyn nodded, though her voice barely worked. "Yes, please. I'd appreciate that." When she returned home, she placed the letters back in the box. Her mind was full of questions that didn't have answers. Why would Robert write in another language? Why would he hide something like that? She made a pot of tea but didn't drink it. She sat by the window looking out at the yard where the autumn leaves had started to fall. Everything looked peaceful, but she couldn't shake the unease that had taken root inside her. That night, as she sat in her armchair, she found herself whispering, "What did you do, Robert?" The wind answered with a low sigh against the windows. The next few days passed slowly. She heard back from Mr. Grant, who said the university historian was willing to take a look at the letters. He arranged for Evelyn to meet him the following afternoon. When she arrived, she carried the box carefully in her arms. The historian, a polite man with round glasses named Dr. Lang, greeted her warmly. "Mr. Grant told me you found something interesting." Evelyn nodded, placing the box on his desk. "I just want to understand. My husband passed away years ago and I found these hidden under the floorboards. He never told me anything about them." Dr. Lang opened the box and took out the letters one by one. He examined them carefully, then looked at the photograph. His brow furrowed. "This is quite something," he murmured. "These are authentic, no doubt. The paper, the ink, they're from the 1940s, and this symbol here on the pin." He picked up the small metal emblem and turned it over in his hand. "This is a German military insignia. From the war." Evelyn's breath caught. "A soldier?" "Yes," Dr. Lang said softly. "But this one isn't American. It belonged to someone from Germany." She shook her head slowly. "No, that can't be. My husband fought for America. He told me he was drafted in 1943. Dr. Lang looked at her with sympathy. "Sometimes people's stories are complicated after a war. Would you mind if I translated one of these letters fully? It might help us understand more." She nodded. He spent the next hour reading carefully, writing notes in a small book. Evelyn watched his face as he worked. At times his expression tightened. Other times he seemed deep in thought, as if connecting pieces of a puzzle. Finally, he looked up. His voice was calm but gentle. "This letter was written by a man named Robert, or at least that's the name he used. He's writing to someone named Friedrich. He says he's preparing to leave Germany after the war. He talks about taking on a new identity and starting a life in America. He also says he doesn't regret his choices, but he fears what might happen if people find out who he really is." Evelyn sat in silence, her hands trembling in her lap. Dr. Lang hesitated before continuing. "Mrs. Moore, I think your husband might have been someone else before he came to America. Possibly one of many who fled Europe after the war." Her mouth went dry. "You mean he lied about who he was?" "I can't say for certain yet," Dr. Lang said gently. "But these documents suggest that. It wasn't uncommon for people to change their names after the war. Some were escaping hardship. Others were escaping justice." Evelyn felt her heart pound. "But Robert wasn't like that. He was good. He worked hard, he loved me, he couldn't have been hiding something like that." Dr. Lang's eyes softened. "People are complex, Mrs. Moore. Sometimes even those we love carry parts of their past they can't share." She nodded numbly, barely hearing him. When she returned home that evening, she sat in the kitchen long after sunset staring at the box. The house felt colder somehow. The ticking clock seemed louder. She thought of all the nights Robert had sat beside her, reading the paper, humming under his breath. All the times he had said he didn't like to talk about the war. She had thought it was because it was painful. But now she wondered, was it guilt? The thought made her stomach twist. She took out one of the photographs again, running her fingers along the edge. "Who were you, really?" she whispered. The days that followed brought more visitors. A journalist had heard from the university about the letters and wanted to write a piece about the discovery. Evelyn refused at first, but curiosity got the better of her. Maybe someone out there could recognize the insignia or the people in the photos. When the article was published a week later, the story spread quickly. Hidden letters found beneath Vermont floorboards may reveal forgotten history, the headline read. Evelyn was stunned by the attention. Reporters began calling her house. Some were kind and respectful. Others seemed more eager for a scandal. She avoided most of them, but late one night, she sat by her window and watched the wind move through the trees, thinking about how strange it felt to have the world suddenly interested in her quiet little life. All she had wanted was to understand the truth, but now it felt like something much bigger had been set in motion. And though she didn't yet know where it would lead, she had a feeling that the secret hidden beneath her floorboards was only the beginning. The days following the publication of the article felt like a blur to Evelyn. The phone rang constantly, and every time she picked it up, her heart seemed to race. She wasn't used to attention like this. Her world had always been small. Quiet mornings, the rhythm of chores, and the comforting solitude of her little farmhouse. But now it felt as though the world was reaching in, pulling her out of her peace, and into something she wasn't sure she understood. The first call that really shook her came from a man who claimed to be a reporter from a well-known news outlet. His voice was smooth and urgent. "Mrs. Moore, we've just published a story about your discovery, and the response has been overwhelming. People are starting to connect the dots. We think we might be looking at something far bigger than we ever imagined." Evelyn's hand shook as she held the receiver. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not sure yet, but the insignia in the photo, the one you found with the letters, might be tied to a group of people who fled Europe after the war. We think your husband could have been involved in something much more complex. Something connected to a larger network of refugees or even former soldiers." Her stomach churned. "My husband was never part of anything like that," she said quickly, a tightness in her chest. "He was just Robert. My Robert." "We'll be doing more research," the reporter said, his tone softening. "But it's important to understand. Sometimes people have hidden parts of their lives, especially when it comes to the war. We'll keep you updated." The line went dead. Evelyn stood there for a moment, staring at the receiver in her hand, the words echoing in her mind. Hidden parts of their lives. She had always thought she knew Robert completely, his past, his thoughts, his heart. But now it felt as if she was standing in the middle of a storm she couldn't see, waiting for the wind to shift and show her what had been hiding all this time. The next few days were a mix of quiet moments and troubling revelations. A historian from the university called her, wanting to schedule another meeting. He said there were people who had heard about the letters and the photographs, and they were very interested in what she had uncovered. At first, Evelyn considered simply asking him to stop. She wasn't ready for any more attention. But there was something in the way the historian spoke, something that hinted at an answer just out of reach. And Evelyn couldn't resist the pull of that answer. She agreed to meet him again. When they sat down together in the university's small, quiet study room, Evelyn felt a strange weight in the air. The historian, a tall, thin man with glasses, had a notebook in front of him. He opened it and placed the photograph of Robert in front of her. "We've had some breakthroughs," he said carefully. "I believe the symbol in this photo is from a group of people who were closely tied to Germany in the early 1940s. Not soldiers in the traditional sense, but rather a group of men and women who helped with escape routes. They facilitated the movement of people fleeing the war. Some of them were part of a network that helped people change identities." Evelyn blinked, confused. "Are you saying my husband was one of these people? That he helped others escape?" "I can't say for certain yet," the historian replied. "But what I can tell you is that there were many people during that time who were involved in such efforts. Some of them were former soldiers. Others were civilians who wanted to help others find a new life after the war. This network operated under a veil of secrecy, and many of them went on to live quiet lives afterward, just like your husband did. It's possible Robert Moore was part of it. It's also possible that he changed his identity when he arrived in America." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. "You're telling me that my Robert was part of something like this and I didn't know?" "I'm not saying he was," the historian said gently, "but the evidence points in that direction. And it's not unusual for people to hide parts of their past. Many of these people were doing things they felt justified in, but they didn't want to carry the weight of it with them for the rest of their lives. They erased those parts of themselves when they started over." The words struck Evelyn like a heavy weight. She looked down at the photograph again, feeling an unfamiliar sense of disconnection. Robert's face seemed so familiar, But now it seemed distant, like it belonged to someone she had never really known. The man in the picture was smiling, his arm around a group of other men, their uniforms clearly marked with insignia she couldn't recognize. But Robert's eyes, they were the same warmth, the same kindness she had known for so many years. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What now? The historian shifted in his seat. We need to look into the people in the photograph. They might have been part of the same network. If we can identify them, we might find out more about what your husband was involved in, but we'll need your help. Do you have any other items? Anything else your husband left behind that might give us more information? Evelyn's mind raced. I don't know. I'll have to look. After the meeting, she spent hours digging through the house. She went through old boxes in the attic, searching through drawers, flipping through photo albums. Anything that could give her more clues. She found letters written to Robert from old friends, photographs of places she didn't recognize, and a few books with strange titles. But there was nothing that gave her the answers she was desperately looking for. By the time evening came, Evelyn was exhausted. She sank into her armchair, her mind still spinning. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected any of it. She had thought Robert's past was simple, his childhood, his military service, their life together. But now it seemed like she had barely scratched the surface. She looked at the photograph of Robert again, and this time, the smile on his face felt almost like a stranger's. Had he really been involved in this underground network? Had he really been part of something so big, so dangerous that he felt the need to hide it? Evelyn couldn't understand how the man she had loved for so long could have kept such a secret from her. But as the historian had said, sometimes people carry parts of themselves that others never see. A knock on the door startled her. When she opened it, she found the neighbor, an elderly woman named Helen, standing on the porch with a concerned look on her face. Evelyn, I hope I'm not disturbing you, Helen said gently, stepping inside. I saw the article in the paper and I was wondering if you were okay. Evelyn smiled weakly. I'm fine, just trying to make sense of everything. Helen sat down across from her. I can only imagine how hard this must be for you. She paused, glancing at the photograph of Robert on the table. You know, I always thought Robert was an honorable man. He seemed so settled here, like he had put his past behind him. But I never asked too many questions. I didn't want to stir up anything. But now, after all these years, I wonder if there's more to his story than he ever let on. Evelyn stared at her hands, not knowing what to say. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. I don't know what to think, Helen, Evelyn whispered. I thought I knew him. I thought I understood everything about him. But now, I don't know who he was. I don't know who I've been living with all these years. Helen placed a hand gently on Evelyn's. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to need time. Whatever the truth is, you don't have to face it alone. Evelyn looked up at her, tears welling in her eyes. What if the truth is something I can't live with? Helen gave her a soft, reassuring smile. You've lived a life with love and kindness. That part of Robert will always be yours. The rest of it, the secrets, the things he never told you, they don't define who you are. They don't change the life you've built. Evelyn squeezed her hand in gratitude, feeling a small sense of comfort in the warmth of her friend's words. But there was still so much left unanswered. The next morning, she decided to take another step forward. She would contact the people who had written the letters. She would reach out to anyone who might know more about this network, about the people in the photograph. She would find the truth, no matter how difficult it was. But as the days turned into weeks, and as more people began to show up asking questions, Evelyn realized that finding the truth might be a journey that would change her life in ways she wasn't ready for. The secrets buried beneath the floorboards weren't the weeks. Following the discovery of Robert's hidden past stretched on, each day blurring into the next. Evelyn had made a quiet promise to herself. She would not let the secrets buried beneath her floorboards define her, no matter how heavy they felt. Yet every time she walked through her house, her gaze inevitably fell to the spot where she had found the box, as though the floor itself was a silent reminder of the mystery that was unfolding. She had decided to follow through with the historian's suggestion and contact some of the people who might have known Robert before he came to America. The historian had given her a few names, people who had been involved in similar escape networks or who might have information about the strange symbol in the photo. But reaching out to strangers about Robert felt wrong. like she was prying into a world that didn't belong to her. Still, the need for answers gnawed at her. How could she live in the same house, in the same life, with so many questions left unanswered? Her first attempt was a phone call to a man named Peter, who had written a letter to Robert in 1944. It was a long shot, but Peter might have known something about the group Robert had been a part of. The letter had been tucked away in the box, fragile with age but still legible. Peter's name was scrawled across the top in the same handwriting as the rest of the letters. She had read it over and over, looking for clues, but found nothing other than vague references to their plans to leave Europe. The phone rang, and Evelyn held her breath, hoping that Peter would pick up. It rang several times before a voice finally answered. "Hello?" Evelyn cleared her throat, her nerves tightening. "Hello, is this Peter?" "Peter Lindgren." There was a long pause on the other end, and then a cautious reply. "Yes, this is Peter. Who is this?" "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Evelyn Moore. I found a letter in my house, one that was addressed to a man named Robert Moore. It was written in 1944. I was wondering if you knew him." The silence stretched on for a moment, and Evelyn's heart raced in her chest. "Yes," Peter said slowly. "I remember Robert. We were part of the same group back then. We helped people get out of Europe. It was dangerous work, but we did what we could." Evelyn's mind spun. She had never expected to hear someone confirm it so easily. "You knew him? You were part of the same group?" "Yes," Peter said again. "But I think you should know that Robert didn't always go by that name. We all had to change our identities. It was the only way to survive. And even then, we couldn't always trust anyone. But Robert, he was good. He always tried to do what was right. He helped a lot of people, even when it put him at risk." Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling dizzy. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered. "Why didn't he ever tell me the truth about his past?" "Because it wasn't something you could just talk about. We were all hiding something, even from the people we loved. It wasn't safe to talk about it. Not then, and certainly not after the war. People like Robert, people who helped others, often found themselves hunted or accused of things they didn't do. It was easier to disappear and start over." Evelyn pressed her hand against her forehead, trying to gather her thoughts. What did he do? What was his role in all of this? Peter hesitated. "I don't know all the details. But Robert was someone we could trust. He worked with the network, helping people find new lives in America. He was there for a lot of people who had nowhere else to turn. I don't think he ever wanted the kind of life you're imagining. But sometimes things get complicated and you do what you have to do to survive." "Did he ever tell you why he came to America?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking. "Why he chose to leave all of that behind?" "I think he wanted to escape," Peter said softly. "We all did. But America was a place where we could start over, where the past wouldn't catch up with us. Some of us made it, some didn't, but Robert, he had a good heart. He did what he could to make up for what happened, even if he couldn't talk about it." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. "But I still don't understand. If he wanted to leave all of that behind, why hide it in the first place? Why not just tell me?" Peter's voice softened. "Because, Evelyn, sometimes people aren't just hiding from the past. They're hiding from the shame of it. And sometimes that's harder to carry than anything else. If you're always running from something, it's hard to look someone in the eye and say, 'This is who I was. This is who I've become.'" Evelyn's eyes welled with tears, and she squeezed her eyes shut, not wanting to show how deeply the words had hit her. "I don't know if I can keep living in this house with all these secrets." "I understand," Peter said, "but I want you to know that Robert did good work. He wasn't perfect, none of us were. But the people he helped, they remember him, and I think he would have wanted you to remember him too." Evelyn thanked him quietly before ending the call. She sat in the silence of her room, feeling lost and alone. She had expected answers, but now she was left with more questions than ever. Robert had been part of a network, hiding from the past just as much as the people he helped. But what else had he been hiding? And what kind of life had he truly led before she met him? The next few days were filled with a quiet sort of turmoil. Evelyn went through the motions of her daily life, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the garden. But her thoughts were consumed with Robert's past. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much she didn't know, so much that had been hidden from her. And while she understood why he had kept his secrets, a part of her couldn't help but feel betrayed. How could the man she had loved so deeply, the man she had trusted completely, have been hiding such a large part of himself from her? One evening, as she was sorting through more of Robert's old belongings in the attic, she came across a box she had never seen before. It was small and made of wood with a lock on the front. She hadn't noticed it when she had cleaned the attic years ago, but now it seemed to call to her. She found the key tucked away in a drawer and unlocked the box. Inside were more photographs, but these were different. They weren't of Robert. They were of other people, men and women, some with serious expressions, others smiling. There was one photograph in particular that caught her attention. It was a photo of a young woman, standing in front of a large building with a suitcase in her hand. The woman's face looked familiar, but Evelyn couldn't place her. She was dressed in a dark coat with a scarf around her neck. Her eyes were intense, as though she were looking straight at the camera. Evelyn picked up the photo, studying it closely. There was something about the way the woman stood that seemed so familiar, but it wasn't until she turned the photo over that she saw a name written in pencil. Clara. Clara. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. The name sounded so familiar, but she couldn't recall why. She flipped through the rest of the photographs, but there was no mention of Clara anywhere else. She pulled out a few more photos, some of Robert in his military uniform, others of the group he had been part of, but none of them seemed to explain why the name Clara had made her heart race. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the photograph of Clara. Something about it was so hauntingly familiar, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Why had Robert kept these photographs hidden away? And who was Clara? The next morning, after a restless night of tossing and turning, Evelyn decided to call Peter again. She needed to know more. She needed to understand who these people were, and what role they had played in Robert's life. When Peter answered the phone, she asked him about Clara. There was a long pause, and then he spoke. Clara was someone Robert knew, someone he cared about deeply. But that's a story for another time. I don't think you're ready to hear it yet, Evelyn. His words hung in the air like a shadow that Evelyn couldn't escape. I need to know, Peter, she said softly. I need to understand everything. I'll tell you when the time is right, he said gently. Just give it time, Evelyn. Some things are better left untold until you're ready to hear them. Evelyn felt her heart ache. She didn't know what to do next. The more she learned, Evelyn woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. The words Peter had said about Clara still echoed in her mind, and she knew she couldn't let it go. She had been living in the shadows of secrets for far too long. It was time to step into the light, no matter how painful or confusing the truth might be. Her hands trembled slightly as she made the decision to visit the university again, hoping the historian might have more information about Clara, or at least be able to explain what Peter had meant by his cryptic words. She knew the answers wouldn't come easily, but she was ready to face whatever she needed to. The air was cool that morning, the first signs of fall in the air, and as Evelyn walked through the small, quiet streets of her town, she found that she was no longer rushing to avoid the past. Instead, she was walking towards it, seeking whatever it was that had been buried for so many years. When she reached the university, the historian was waiting for her in his office. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes as she sat down across from him. I've been thinking about our last conversation, Evelyn began, her voice steady but determined. I need to know more about Clara. Peter said something about her, but he wouldn't tell me much. He said I wasn't ready to hear it. The historian nodded slowly, his fingers tapping gently on the desk. Clara, he began, was a part of the network. She was one of the people who helped others escape the chaos in Europe. But her story, well, it's not a simple one. She was very close to Robert. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Close? She repeated. What do you mean by that? The historian leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant as he began to speak. Robert and Clara were involved in something much larger than you probably realized. They weren't just helping people leave Europe. They were part of a movement, a group of people who were working behind the scenes to fight against the oppressive forces that had taken over their countries. They were part of something that was dangerous, something secretive. And Robert, he was more than just a bystander. He was one of the key players in that movement. Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. Robert, the man she had known and loved for so many years, had been part of a resistance movement? She couldn't imagine him in that way. He had always been so quiet, so unassuming, And yet here she was, hearing about a side of him she never knew existed. Clara, the historian continued, was a central figure in this network. She was known for her ability to think on her feet, to get people to safety when things seemed impossible. But Clara was also someone who carried a heavy burden. She and Robert shared something, a connection that went beyond their work. It wasn't just friendship. It was something more. Evelyn's stomach turned. A connection? She asked quietly. What kind of connection? The historian hesitated before answering, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know all the details, but there were rumors. Rumors about Robert and Clara, about their relationship. Some believed they were in love. Others said it was more complicated than that. But one thing was clear. Their bond was deep. And when the war ended, she didn't survive. Robert carried the weight of her loss with him for the rest of his life. Evelyn's mind was racing. She had never known any of this. Robert had never spoken of Clara, never mentioned her in any of the stories he told about his time in Europe. Why had he kept this part of his life hidden? And why hadn't he ever told her about Clara? Was it because of the bond they had shared? Or was there something more that Robert had been protecting her from? The historian continued. After the war, Robert did everything he could to erase his past. He changed his identity, moved to America, and built a new life. But Clara's death, it changed him. It was a turning point. He became a different man. The man you knew, Evelyn, was someone who had buried the pain of losing her. Evelyn's heart felt heavy as the historian's words sank in. Robert had carried a secret burden, a loss so profound that it had shaped the person he became. And all these years Evelyn had never known. She had never understood the depth of his pain, the weight he had been carrying. She had never known that the quiet man she had married had been hiding a past so full of sorrow and regret. Is that why he never told me? Evelyn asked softly. Because of Clara? Because of the pain she caused him? The historian nodded. I believe so. Robert was trying to protect you from a past that he thought would hurt you. He didn't want to burden you with the truth. But now, with everything that's come to light, it's clear that the past has a way of catching up with us. Robert's secret was never meant to stay hidden forever. Evelyn sat there in silence, her mind spinning as she tried to process everything she had just learned. Robert had been part of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. He had loved someone else before her, someone who had been an integral part of his life. And yet, all these years, he had kept that part of himself locked away, buried beneath the weight of their life together. As the historian spoke, Evelyn began to realize that the secrets Robert had kept from her weren't just about his past. They were about the man he had become, the man she had known and loved. Robert had always been someone who valued simplicity, who wanted to protect the people he loved from the complexities of the world. But in doing so, he had created a wall between them, a wall that now seemed impossible to break down. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling weak beneath her. Thank you, she said quietly to the historian. I need some time to think. The historian nodded, his face filled with understanding. Take all the time you need, Evelyn. But remember, the truth doesn't have to be a burden. It can also be a way to heal. Evelyn left the university feeling like a different person. The world around her seemed unchanged, but she felt as if everything had shifted. The life she had known, the life with Robert, was no longer the same. She had always thought of herself as a part of his story, but now she realized that she had only seen a small fragment of it. When she returned home, she went straight to the attic. The box she had found, the one with the photographs of Clara, was still on the floor where she had left it. She picked it up and carefully began to look through the pictures again. Each image told a story, each one a piece of Robert's past that had remained hidden from her. There was a photo of Clara, standing with a group of people, her face determined and strong. And next to her there was Robert. His expression was different, more serious than she had ever seen him. There was something about that photo that made her pause. It was as if, in that moment, she could see the man Robert had been before he became the man she had known. Evelyn felt a tear slip down her cheek as she looked at the photo. She had always thought she knew who Robert was, but now she realized that she had only known one version of him. He had been a man shaped by his past, by the choices he had made, and by the love he had lost. And in that loss, he had created a new life, a life that she had become a part of. But now, as the weight of the past pressed down on her, Evelyn realized that the truth, though painful, was the only way forward. She couldn't keep living in the shadows of Robert's secrets. She had to learn to embrace them, to understand them, and to move forward with the knowledge of who he had been. As the sun began to set, Evelyn sat on the attic floor, surrounded by the photographs and letters that had once been hidden away. She understood now that Robert's story wasn't just his to tell, it was theirs. And though the past was full of pain, it was also full of love, resilience, and the kind of quiet courage that had shaped the man she had known. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the world she had always known. It was time to let go of the past, to honor it, and to move forward. Whatever came next, Evelyn knew one thing for sure: she would never be the same.